case of Jessica Camilleri. Jessica Camilleri, the second daughter of Rita and Vince, an Australian Maltese couple, was born with a mild mental disability. Her IQ was between 55 and 60, placing her in the bottom 1% of the population. People with mild intellectual disability like Jessica learn to communicate and express themselves, but at a slower pace than others. They may take longer to develop skills like speaking, reading, writing, and math, but they can still adapt to daily life. Due to her condition, Jessica was slow in reaching developmental milestones like walking, talking, and coordinating movements. She started school much later than her peers, which made her a target for teasing, discomfort, and bullying from her classmates for being different. As a result, Jessica developed stress, anxiety, and anger, particularly towards females. She also struggled with intermittent explosive disorder, characterized by sudden repeated outbursts of impulsive, aggressive, and violent behavior, as well as angry verbal eruptions that were disproportionate to the situation. At school, Jessica exhibited aggressive behavior towards both students and teachers, including a notable incident where she punched a male student and refused to release her grip, leading to her indefinite suspension, and subsequent confinement at home under the care of her mother, Rita, who received a disability pension to support her. Jessica's behavioral issues were symptomatic of her intellectual disability and struggled with irrational outbursts of anger. Furthermore, she was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, a chronic brain condition that affects millions of children worldwide, making it challenging for her to regulate her behavior. In addition to these conditions, Jessica also suffered from severe bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety, and autism spectrum disorders, which impacted her judgment, self-awareness, and empathy towards others. She had obsessive tendencies such as fixating on her three favorite numbers, 2, 3, and 5, each of which she associated with a specific color, yellow, green, and purple. Respectively, Jessica would often repeat these numbers to generate random phone numbers, which she would then use to call and talk to men. In one instance, starting in 2018, she began harassing the staff of a meat company in Daylesford, England, even going so far as to threaten the owner's family, claiming she would decapitate them with a chainsaw. Jessica had a persistent fascination with horror movies, particularly the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. She would spend hours re-watching disturbing videos, and this obsession often led to furious outbursts when her mother, Rita, tried to restrict her access to these films. Jessica and her mother lived together in a house in St. Clair, a suburb of Sydney, New South Wales, Australia. Jessica's father, Vince, had divorced Rita during her teenage years due to the strain their daughter's behavioral problems had put on their marriage. Jessica struggled with low self-esteem and a childish, naive outlook, but she also displayed strong narcissistic tendencies. Deep down, she felt she was one of a kind and entitled to special treatment due to her mental disability. This occasionally led her to be exploitative and egocentric. Despite this, Rita remained devoted to caring for her daughter, acknowledging her issues, but feeling a strong sense of responsibility to look after and protect her. Rita even went so far as to reach out and apologize to one of the recipients of Jessica's harassing phone calls, confessing that she was at a loss for how to manage her daughter's behavior. Jessica was very close to her mother, who dedicated her life to taking care of her and meeting all her needs. Instead of sending her to a psychiatric institution for full-time care, her mother chose to keep her at home. In fact, Rita's life revolved around Jessica. The tragic event of July 20th, 2019 was not a standalone incident. In the 6 years leading up to it, Jessica had been convicted twice for assaults that caused actual bodily harm. She had also physically attacked her aunt and her sister's mother-in-law by pulling their hair. But she avoided jail time and was always placed in the care of her mother Rita, the one person who could tolerate her behavior. Jessica had also exhibited aggressive behavior towards women she encountered in the streets and shopping centers, lashing out at those she perceived as looking at her wrongly or making her feel ashamed. On one occasion, she was even barred from a doctor's office after becoming violent towards another patient in the waiting room due to paranoia. In early 2018, Jessica's aggressive behavior continued when she attacked a nurse during a hospital visit with her mother Rita. As a result, She was admitted to a mental health unit for 9 days to treat a severe episode of mood disorder. She was prescribed lithium for her supposed bipolar disorder, along with antipsychotic medications. However, by the end of 2018, about 6 months before the tragic event, Jessica had stopped taking her medication and instead began using natural remedies to manage her conditions. Rita was at her wit's end and paid $2,500 to a medium on Queen Street in St. Mary's, a western suburb of Sydney, in a desperate bid to exorcise the demon she believed was possessing her daughter Jessica. Despite her family and friends warning her about the dangers of living with Jessica, Rita remained adamant that her daughter wouldn't hurt anyone. According to Christy, Jessica's older sister, their mother Rita had a heart of gold, always putting others before herself, including Jessica, who continually refused to seek professional help. Rita's sister often voiced her concerns that Jessica might harm her, recognizing Rita's unconditional love for her daughter. However, Rita's motherly love made her oblivious to these warnings, even on the day before the tragic attack when she had to take Jessica to a police station due to her threatening calls to strangers. Jessica felt humiliated by her mom in a parking lot after visiting her sister due to a stranger's brief presence. Later, when her mom refused to order food from Red Rooster, Jessica called the restaurant 3 times. She then demanded her mom call a doctor, but Jessica's erratic behavior scared him off. At wit's end, Rita called an ambulance to take Jessica to a mental health facility. On the night of July 20th, 2019, Jessica's most severe episode of rage was about to unfold. In a brutal attack, Jessica dragged her 57-year-old mother Rita by the hair to the kitchen of their own home. There, she savagely attacked Rita with 7 meat cleavers, 4 of which broke under the force of her blows. In total, Jessica stabbed Rita over 100 times in the head and neck, driven by a morbid curiosity fueled by her daily obsession with horror films. The autopsy revealed the full extent of Rita's injuries, which included massive trauma to her head and neck, and death by multiple stab wounds that resulted in decapitation at the second vertebrae in her upper neck. Furthermore, Rita's body showed over 90 defensive wounds, indicating that she was conscious for a significant part of the attack. Enduring extreme physical pain and emotional terror at the hands of her own daughter, whom she had lovingly cared for. Jessica's 4-year-old nephew, the son of her older sister Christy, was present during the attack. The boy had been in Rita's care for a few days due to Jessica's apparent improvement. However, he was forced to witness Jessica repeatedly stabbing his grandmother and ultimately decapitating her. When the boy tried to intervene, Jessica attacked him, causing a minor head injury. The traumatic scene was so disturbing that the young boy began vomiting in response. Jessica called the emergency number from her mother Rita's cell phone, confessing to her murder and claiming self-defense, stating that Rita had attacked her first. However, this was not true, and Jessica had actually committed the brutal act. In reality, after killing her mother, Jessica panicked and repeatedly stabbed Rita's lifeless body, ultimately decapitating her and inflicting over 100 wounds. She then dumped Rita's head in a nearby neighbor's front yard. When the police arrived at their St. Clair, Sydney home, Jessica was outside, her clothes stained with her mother's blood, holding a water bottle. She showed no remorse for her actions and was more concerned about her own fate. Jessica asked the police officers and detectives if it was possible to bring someone back to life after decapitation, believing in the possibility of medical miracles that could reattach her mother's head. The police officer responded that this idea was unrealistic, but Jessica insisted, thinking that doctors could perform miraculous surgeries and reattach her mother's head. She also inquired about the potential consequences of her actions, specifically asking if she would face the death penalty. Upon learning that Australia does not have capital punishment, Jessica felt relieved. Furthermore, Jessica confessed to the police that the idea of decapitating her mother came from the horror movies she obsessively watched. A police officer's body camera recorded a chilling conversation at the crime scene on July 20th, 2019, at 11:43 p.m. The first responders described the scene as one of the most horrific they had ever seen. The next day, July 21st, 2019, Jessica appeared in court but didn't apply for bail. A friend explained that this was not surprising, as Jessica probably didn't understand the bail process. After a trial that highlighted her long history of mental illness, Jessica was found guilty of manslaughter in December 2020. She had pleaded not guilty to murder due to her disability. In early 2021, Jessica was sentenced to a maximum of 21 years and 7 months in prison. She will be eligible for parole after serving 16 years and 2 months, which would be September 19, 2035. The prosecutor argued that Rita's brutal murder was the culmination of a lifetime of escalating violence by Jessica, which started with hair pulling and eventually led to a deadly explosive attack. The prosecutor also stated that Jessica posed a moderate to high risk of reoffending and remained a danger to the community. Christy, Jessica's older sister, said that Jessica had killed and butchered their mother, and for that she could never forgive her. However, Rita's sister held a different view, hoping that Jessica would get the help she needed and that Rita could finally rest in peace, knowing that Jessica was being cared for by a system that had failed her when she was alive. The judge presiding over the case offered counseling services to the jury members, recognizing that the disturbing evidence they had heard could haunt them long after the trial. The judge also admitted that selecting a jury for Jessica's trial was difficult, as many people were reluctant to participate in a trial involving such a disturbing crime. The judge described Rita's murder as one of the most brutal and cruel cases of homicide a court could encounter, emphasizing that the crime's severity was exacerbated by its occurrence in the victim's own home. Jessica's lawyer revealed that his client had expressed regret in a letter to her family after the crime. In the letter, Jessica accepted responsibility for her mother's death, acknowledging that Rita had not provoked her and taking blame for her actions. However, one of the psychiatrists who evaluated Jessica noted that she struggled to communicate through social gestures and displayed a relatively flat affect. The psychiatrist found no evidence of schizophrenia or hallucinations in Jessica. The conclusion was that Jessica's risk factors could only be managed in the long term with a comprehensive mental health support plan. Since entering prison, Jessica has persistently caused trouble. Only 2 months after her arrival on September 9, 2019, she got into a fight with another inmate over food trading and threw a teacup at them. Although she was charged with assault in local court the next day, she did not receive any additional punishment. On October 14, 2019, Jessica attacked another inmate, which resulted in her being placed in solitary confinement in her cell for 5 days. On November 3, 2019, she disobeyed an order, and on July 31, 2020, she damaged property, incurring a fine of $200 Australian dollars. Jessica was involved in another assault on November 21, 2020, which led to her being placed in solitary confinement for 7 days. In January 2021, she was convicted of common assault again, but did not receive any further punishment. Jessica has explained her behavior, saying that other prisoners make her life difficult, regardless of what she does or where she goes. She has also stated that prison life is tough and very different from the outside world. On May 15, 2023, Justice Peter Hamill of the Sydney Supreme Court rejected claims that Callery's original sentence was too harsh, and that the judge who sentenced her had misjudged the severity of her crime. However, Justice Hamill did rule that Callery should be resentenced, a decision supported by Justices Christine Adamson and Richard Kavanaugh. The basis for this decision was Callery's bizarre behavior, including walking into the street with her mother's head and asking emergency responders if they could reattach it, which demonstrated how out of touch with reality her actions were. After considering the opinions of multiple psychiatrists and a psychologist, Justice Hamill found that Callery's intellectual disability and autism spectrum disorder meant she only had a basic understanding of what was morally wrong. As a result, he ordered that she be resentenced to 16 years in prison, with a minimum of 12 years before being eligible for parole. Jessica Bagjin was born May 3, 1979, and lived with her parents in the small town of Sitka, Alaska. Sitka was a place known for having little to no crime. As a teenager, she enjoyed listening to Willie Nelson, loved to cook. She enjoyed going fishing with her family and was always excited to participate in the Thanksgiving pie making marathons. She planned to attend college in Arizona and pursue a career in photography. On her 17th birthday, May 3, 1996, She spent the evening celebrating with her sister and her friends at her sister's home off Sawmill Creek Road. Early the next morning, she decided to walk home, which was only about a mile away. Her parents woke the next morning to find that she never made it home, and her father then reported her missing to the Sitka Police Department. The local search and rescue team focused their efforts in the wooded area west of the Indian River between the campus of Sheldon Jackson College and Sawmill Creek Road. They soon found a shirt later identified as the one Jessica was wearing when she was last seen alive. Then Jessica's body was found beneath the trunk of a large fallen tree in the Sitka National Historic Park, about 70 feet off the bike path, which paralleled Sawmill Creek Road. The rest of her clothing and belongings were also found in the immediate area. 9 days later, a local man named Richard Bingham confessed to her sexual assault and murder. He had been living in the harbor on a boat and employed as a janitor at Sheldon Jackson College and was a heavy drinker. Sadly, Bingham was a simple-minded man that was easily manipulated. One example of this was one time Bingham had been told he had stolen a salmon from a fish processor where he worked, so he showed up with a replacement fish. The manager told him that he hadn't stolen a fish and to go home. When news of Jessica's death overwhelmed the town, a drinking buddy of Bingham suggested to him that he may have had something to do with the killing because he often blacked out while drinking. Soon, he was at the police station telling the officers he was having disturbing dreams and flashbacks about the murder and asked if they could help him. Officers interrogated Bingham for several hours using the Reed technique, which is an aggressive method that has been criticized for its tendency to produce false confessions. His confession was allegedly coerced and nothing he volunteered himself was accurate, but he was still arrested. It was determined months later that none of the physical evidence collected from the crime scene connected him to the actual crime. A psychologist testified that Bingham was vulnerable to suggestion and had intellectual deficiencies. He went to trial for Jessica's sexual assault and murder in early 1997 and was found not guilty on all charges. He then moved to Washington to avoid the residents of Sitka as they still believed he was the killer. The hunt then continued for Jessica's real killer, the man with the matching DNA. More than 100 potential suspects were cleared through DNA comparison and the trail went cold. In September of 2018, the Alaska Cold Case Unit discussed utilizing a new forensic DNA procedure called genetic genealogy. After reviewing the DNA evidence in the case, it was determined that there was sufficient DNA from evidence collected from the original investigation to generate a profile of the suspect. The suspect's DNA was submitted to Parabon Nanolabs a few weeks later, and in 2019, a profile was developed and uploaded into public genealogy databases. By the end of the year, after months of genealogical research, a new suspect emerged by the name of Steve Branch. Investigators established that Branch lived in Sitka at the time of the murder. Also, it was learned that the same year as Jessica's murder, Branch had been investigated by the Sitka police for sexually assaulting another teenage girl. 2 months before Jessica was murdered, a worker at C-Mart, a local grocery, found a teenage coworker crying in the break room. When the coworker asked what was wrong, the 18-year-old girl said Steve Branch had raped her. He was indicted and arrested for the incident in June of 1996. Branch took the stand and cried, talking about the mistake he had made, but maintaining the encounter was consensual. After only a few hours, the jury decided to acquit him. Branch stayed in Sitka for 15 more years and then moved to Austin, Arkansas in 2010. In January 2020, the Alaska Cold Case Unit reached out to the Arkansas State Police for their assistance. For weeks, they attempted to obtain a discarded DNA sample from Branch, but were unsuccessful. A few months later, Sitka PD was able to obtain a discarded DNA sample from a relative of Branch. Kinship DNA analysis that was completed in May of 2020 determined Steve Branch was most likely the source of the suspect DNA found on Jessica's clothing and body. In early August, investigators from the Alaska Bureau of Investigation traveled to Arkansas. The investigators went to Branch's home to question him and obtain a DNA sample in order to positively confirm he was the source of the suspect DNA. But he denied any involvement in the case and refused to voluntarily provide a DNA sample. Investigators left the residence to apply for a search warrant to secure a DNA sample directly from him. However, Approximately a half hour after the investigators left his home, he shot himself. After securing a search warrant, investigators collected Branch's DNA during his autopsy. On August 10, 2020, it was confirmed that Branch's DNA matched the suspect DNA found on Jessica and at the scene. With the help of several private citizens who voluntarily uploaded their DNA profiles into public genealogy databases and then authorized their profiles to be accessible to law enforcement, the genealogists were able to piece together a complex family tree that eventually exposed Branch as Jessica's killer. After 25 years, Jessica's case is finally closed, and while it might not be the justice she deserved, at least her family now has some closure. Darlene DePaula Krashik was born August 22, 1966 in Maryland to Paul and Betty. At the age of 20, she was an Army specialist on active duty stationed at Fort Carson, Colorado, and assigned to the 73rd Maintenance Company as a mechanic doing vehicle wheel repairs. On March 27, 1987, two officers from the Colorado Springs Police Department found her body while on routine patrol about 5:20 a.m. behind the Korean Club restaurant in Colorado Springs, Colorado. An autopsy would determine the cause of death to be from strangulation. The night before, she had gone to a club called Shuffles with other soldiers where she spent the evening drinking and dancing. Her friends decided to leave her there, and she was last seen leaving the club between midnight and 1 a.m. with an unidentified man. Both Shuffles and the Korean Club restaurant have since closed down and were about a mile apart. Detectives determined from the condition of her body, as well as fresh tire impressions in the nearby snow, that she had been killed elsewhere and then her body dumped behind the restaurant. Police found DNA evidence on her body but couldn't find a match, and the case went cold. Since DNA testing was not available in 1986, the case was reopened in 2004 and 2011, and an unknown male DNA profile was found on several pieces of evidence. In 2017, the DNA was used to create two composite photos showing what the suspect could have possibly looked like at 25 years old and between 50 and 55 years old. Based on the genealogy information, the Criminal Investigation Command would hit on a name in the database, Michael White. White is a retired soldier who was stationed at Fort Carson at the time of her murder. Photos of White also match the composite sketch, and on June 12, 2019, he was arrested for the murder of Darlene at his home in the 1500 block of East 131st Place in Thornton, Colorado. During his trial in June of 2021, he testified that he joined the Army in 1979, right after high school, and was stationed in Fort Carson in 1986. White said while stationed in Colorado Springs, it was common for Fort Carson soldiers to visit the Korean Club restaurant and Shuffles to drink beer and dance with women. He said in 1987, he lived off base with his then-wife, Hilda. He denies murdering Darlene and claims to not know how his DNA got on her or the wire hanger used to strangle her. He did admit to drinking and partying a lot during that time at the bar Darlene was last seen at and the place where her body was found. He also admitted to dancing and going home with a lot of women, but said he did not remember Darlene or recognize her in the photos. On June 25, 2021, Michael White was sentenced to life in prison without parole for the torture, murder, and sexual assault of Darlene, and her parents were finally able to see their daughter receive justice after 34 long years. Banaz Mahmod was born in Iraq in 1985. She grew up in a traditional family with strong religious beliefs. When she was 10, her family moved to the UK, but their cultural values remained unchanged. At 17, Banaz was forced into a marriage with a man 10 years her senior, who spoke no English and was illiterate. The marriage was marked by physical and emotional abuse, which Banaz endured for 2 years before finally finding the courage to leave. Despite her family's disapproval, Banaz started a new life and met a man named Rahmat Soleimani, with whom she fell deeply in love. However, their relationship was kept secret due to the cultural taboos surrounding romance outside of marriage. Tragically, Banaz's family was not willing to let her move on from her past. On January 26, 2006, Rahmat reported Banaz missing to the police, but they didn't take the report seriously, convinced that she was just staying with friends. However, Rahmat persisted, and eventually the police were forced to investigate. Banaz's family had a sinister motive for their behavior, which would ultimately lead to devastating consequences. However, Banaz had found love and happiness with her boyfriend, Rahmeth. They had dreams of getting married, having children, and building a happy family life. These fantasies were Banaz's joy and kept her going despite her family's hatred and aggression towards her. Her family had never accepted her husband, and in early October 2005, Banaz noticed that she was being followed by people sent by her father. On October 10, 2005, Banaz went to the police and told them about her life with her husband, the injuries she had suffered, and the surveillance she was under. She shared her fears for her safety and even her life, but the police did not take her statements seriously. For about 2 months, Banaz and Rahmeth met secretly, but in early December 2005, they were spotted by people from her clan. This led to a council of male relatives gathering at her family home, where it was decided that Banaz should be killed to restore the family's honor. Banaz overheard this conversation and reported it to the police, but they again did not take her words seriously. 2 weeks later, Banaz's father tricked her into going to a relative's house, where she was attacked. She managed to escape and went to the police, who took her to the hospital. After being discharged, Banaz went to live with Rahmeth. However, by mid-January 2006, Banaz's family began urging her to return home, to mend their relationship and discuss her marriage to Rahmeth. Despite her fears, Banaz agreed to go back to her father's house, believing that her mother would protect her. Before Banaz Mahmod returned to her family's home, she visited the police station to report her concerns and name individuals who might harm her. However, she disappeared on January 22, 2006, and her friend Rahmeth was unable to contact her, then filed a missing persons report with the police. The police eventually became involved in the case, and Chief Inspector Caroline Good was appointed to lead the investigation. She organized a large-scale search of properties associated with the Mahmod family, suspecting that Banaz might be being held captive. The police questioned Banaz's father, uncle, and ex-husband, as well as 3 of her cousins, Omar Hussein, Muhammad Ali, and Muhammad Hamid, who were also suspects. Despite the efforts of the police, Banaz's family was uncooperative and refused to help with the investigation. The police found no pictures of Banaz at her family's home, and her family members gave contradictory and false statements about her whereabouts. The police arrested 30 people, including Banaz's family members and cousins, but they all tried to slow down the investigation by giving false information. The police obtained permission to install listening devices in the cells of the arrested men, including Banaz's father, uncle, and Muhammad Hamid. The wiretap recordings revealed that the 3 men had no remorse for their actions and were actually proud of what they had done to Banaz. The recordings revealed that on the morning of January 23rd, the Mahmod family deliberately left their home, allowing Ali Hussein and Hamid to enter and attack Banaz. The attack lasted for 2 hours, during which Banaz was subjected to beatings and violence. Finally, Hamid strangled her to death with a cord. The wiretap recordings also revealed that Banaz's cousin, Muhammad Hamid, had been involved in the attack and had threatened Rahmeth, which became a turning point in the investigation. The police were horrified as they listened to recordings that detailed the brutal murder of Banaz and the perpetrators' proud descriptions of their actions. The investigation revealed that Banaz's body had been stuffed into a suitcase and taken out of London to a derelict house with a garden in Birmingham. Caroline Good, a detective, matched the information she received with the movement data of the arrested phones and determined the search area. Despite the vastness of the area, the work could take a long time, but the criminals themselves helped the investigation by being talkative and reveling in their actions. During the conversation, one of them mentioned putting a freezer back in its place, which gave Caroline a key lead to follow. A police helicopter was dispatched to search the area, and while circling, it spotted a house with a pile of trash in the backyard, including a white oblong object that looked like a freezer. When the police inspected the area, they started digging in shifts. As they dug, they eventually reached a depth of about shoulder height. At this point, they were about to give up. But then Caroline Good recalled the words of Muhammad Hamama, who had bragged about burying Banaz so deeply that she would only be discovered if someone tipped them off. Caroline convinced the team to extend the search for 1 more day, and late in the evening of April 28, 2006, the suitcase was found. Banaz's remains were in extremely poor condition, and only dental records and DNA samples could be used to identify her. Her body was folded into a fetal position and hidden in a suitcase, buried under a freezer in the garden of a house in Birmingham. On May 1, 2006, the suspects were charged, but they showed no remorse and were convinced they had done the right thing. After the discovery of Banaz's remains, police received a flood of people providing alibis for the suspects, claiming they were in public on the day of the alleged murder. In total, 50 people were involved in Banaz's death, and Caroline Good felt anger, disgust, and contempt for the men who participated in the murder. The case eventually went to trial in March 2007, and the prosecutor described the crime as a cold-blooded and heartless execution ordered by Banaz's father and uncle. In June 2007, a jury found all three guilty and sentenced them to life imprisonment with minimum terms ranging from 17 to 23 years. The judge condemned the crime as barbaric and heartless, saying that the father had put his status in society above the life of his own flesh and blood. Muhammad Ali was arrested in Iraq in April 2006 for a crime against a young woman named Banaz Mahmod. The London police worked to extradite him to the UK. In June 2009, Ali was extradited and eventually sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 21 years. The last of the 5 perpetrators, Omar Hussein, was hiding in the Iraqi countryside. In December 2009, he got into an argument with his brother and was shot in the leg. He was taken to the hospital where the police arrested him. Initially, Hussein denied being in London in 2005 and therefore couldn't be involved in Banaz's death. However, UK social security records proved that he was receiving refugee benefits at the time, contradicting his claim. In March 2010, Hussein was extradited and later sentenced to life imprisonment. Donna Ammon, who was in the house at the time of Banaz's murder, was sentenced to 8 years in prison for helping to dispose of the victim's body and obstructing justice. A recorded interview at the police station revealed her family's guilt. Banaz had tried to leave her abusive husband several times, but returned to try again at the insistence of her family. The police's indifference to her plight led to her death, which sparked significant changes in how honor killings are handled. An inquiry into police misconduct was launched, and 9 police officers were prosecuted for their inadequate response. 7 received reprimands and 2 were dismissed. Caroline Good, a determined detective, not only found Banaz's body, but also secured the conviction of her father and uncle and brought back the escaped criminals from Iraq. Unfortunately, this wouldn't bring Banaz back to life or change the fact that her own relatives, who should have protected her, were responsible for her death. Banaz was buried in the Merton and Sutton Joint Cemetery in Morden. A memorial service was held on June 26, 2007 at the MN Auditorium, followed by a granite memorial headstone at her grave. Her family did not attend either service. The memorial was paid for by law enforcement officials working on the Banaz case and the women's rights organization. Ramat Soleimani, Banaz's boyfriend, remained in the UK under the Witness Protection Program, never recovered from her death. In May 2016, 10 years after the crime, he hanged himself, marking his 3rd attempt to end his life. The extent of the problem with police handling of honor crimes is unknown due to the lack of recording requirements. However, estimates suggest that in 2000, there were 5,000 honor killings worldwide, and in 2010, over 2,800 cases of honor-based violence were reported in Iran and Kurdistan. These crimes typically involve women who are perceived to have brought shame to their families or communities. Most cases occur in South Asia or the Middle East, predominantly in Muslim communities. However, cases like that of 19-year-old Banaz Mahmod, a Kurdish woman living in Britain, highlight the tensions faced by immigrant communities as they struggle to adapt to changing lifestyles. Some groups estimate that thousands of honor crimes go unreported in minority communities in Britain, where women are often taken abroad and forced into marriage or harmed when their modern outlook on life conflicts with their traditional male communities. Banaz Mahmod, who was murdered in 2006, is a tragic example of this. Her older sister Beal urges other women in similar situations not to be afraid to seek help before it's too late. Even today, Beal lives in fear for her life, hiding her identity behind a long black veil that covers her entire body and face, except for her eyes. The story of Banaz Mahmod is a stark reminder that women who try to escape or live a secret life are constantly in fear of being found and punished. The Metropolitan Police team that investigated Banaz's murder and brought those responsible to justice was awarded for their work in detective investigation. A crucial piece of evidence was a videotape that captured Banaz's nervous testimony, in which she described the violence and oppression she faced at the hands of her abusive husband and the intimidation she suffered from men on the street. She warned of her impending death due to the shame she had brought upon her family. Unfortunately, her warnings were ignored, and she was ultimately killed. Today's case will take us to Fort Wayne, a city located in northeastern Indiana. With a population of more than 250,000 people, it is the second most populous city in Indiana. Fort Wayne's economy in the 21st century is based on distribution, transportation, and logistics. The city also boasts one of the country's best zoos, a popular hands-on science center, great wedding venues, and a famous theater, amongst other things. Noel was born on June 28, 1991, and was 25 years old as of 2017. Brian, on the other hand, was born on July 7, 1987, in Fort Wayne, where he grew up with his sister, Amber Nicole Lash. Those who knew Brian when he was little described him as someone who was always getting into trouble. It's not clear when Brian and Noel met and got married. However, they both lived together in an apartment located at 4811 Weiser Park Avenue in Fort Wayne. Brian and his wife Noel had a young son who they named King Richard. In addition to this, Brian also had two daughters named Olivia Joyce Lash and Alexis Marie Lash, but whom he had them with remains unclear. To put food on the table, both Noel and Brian were involved in the selling of marijuana. The drug deals were usually done in locations far away from their home. However, these deals were sometimes conducted within their home. It was a risky business, as the drug trades often brought them in contact with all sorts of dangerous people. Brian and Noel were well aware of the dangers, but the profit they were making from the business kept them going. However, things got really messy when they least expected it. On June 9, 2017, Noel and Brian decided to organize a party at their home. It wasn't something big, but was more of a get-together. What the couple had in mind was to invite a few family members and friends over for a barbecue and then watch the Cleveland Cavaliers and Golden State Warriors basketball game that was happening that evening. They also planned to use the opportunity to sell marijuana to those who wanted to purchase it. It was a good plan for them, as it would give them a chance to kill two birds with one stone. They began to make preparations, an expectation of their visitors. Once the evening came around, those that they had invited began to gradually arrive, and pleasantries were exchanged. Amongst those who showed up were Noel's sister and her boyfriend. A friend of the couple, known as Dustin Neal, was also one of those who attended the party. Noel and Dustin had known each other since they were kids. At around 9 p.m., the game which they had all gathered to watch began, and they all sat down with plates of barbecue and bottles of drink in hands to enjoy it. The atmosphere became increasingly noisy due to the noise made by the men whenever their favorite team scored. In the end, the game ended with the Cavaliers winning. It was already late by this time, and the guests began to take their leave one after the other. And Dustin also announced his departure and bade the couple goodbye. The people who remained were Noel's sister and her boyfriend. With nothing left to do, someone suggested playing a card game, and the rest agreed to it. They all sat down to the game and in no time were engrossed in it. Several hours went by, and it wasn't until 3 a.m. that they all decided that they had had enough. Noel's sister and her boyfriend then took their leave. Due to how exhausted Brian and Noel were, they went straight to bed, telling each other that they would clean up the next morning. They had also made plans to meet up with Noel's sister and mother for the New Haven Canals Day, an annual festival with plenty of family fun and entertainment. A few minutes before 10 a.m. on June 10, 2017, Noel's sister and her mother, Kimberly Gomez, arrived at Brian and Noel's home to check up on them. They had earlier called the couple's mobile phones to remind them of the plan they had made concerning the festival, but neither of them had picked up. Their thought was the two were likely tired from the previous night's party and had overslept. Noel's sister and Kimberly knocked on the front door of the house, but got no response. It was dead silent, except for the noise made by nearby birds, as well as the sound of vehicles in the distance. After knocking and calling out the couple's name to no avail, they decided to try the door and discovered that it was unlocked. They stepped into the unusually silent home and immediately knew that something was wrong. There was a faint smell in the air, but they could not immediately tell what it was. Noel and Brian had not yet cleaned up, and this was obvious from how disorganized the living room was. There were bottles lying everywhere, as well as plates that had been used to serve barbecue to the guests the previous night. Amid the chaos, Noel's sister noticed something odd. The about 50-inch Vizio TV that they had all watched the basketball game on the previous evening was missing. She also noticed that a video cassette recorder was nowhere in sight. A lot of things went through her mind in that instance, but none of it made any sense. She and her mother, Kimberly, made their way to the couple's bedroom, and that was when they saw the blood. The faint smell they had perceived upon entering the house was blood, and as they moved closer to the bedroom, it became stronger. At that point, their anxiety had doubled because they knew that something really bad had happened. When they opened the bedroom door, the blood was even more than they anticipated. On the bed were both Brian and Noel. They were covered in blood, and it was obvious that they were both dead. They both had what looked like stab wounds all over their body, but it seemed as if Noel had it the worst. There were empty, bloody holes in the place where her eyes should have been. Upon seeing the gory scene that looked like something out of a horror movie, Noel and her mother simultaneously gasped in shock and screamed. They couldn't believe what was before their eyes. It was all too much to take. 911 was immediately dialed, and in a matter of minutes, police officers from the Fort Wayne Police Department arrived on the scene. They immediately secured the area and began to do a thorough sweep of the house in the hallway between the bedroom and kitchen. They noticed a black-colored object sitting on the floor. Upon closer inspection, it was discovered that it was a mobile phone that belongs to Noel. The phone was kept as evidence. Officers took a look at different parts of the house and collected all that they believed would help them in their investigation. After this was done, Noel and Brian's bodies were transported away for autopsy. 2 days after the murder took place, the autopsies of the dead couple were conducted by Dr. Scott Wonger, and the results showed both had died as a result of fatal stab wounds. The results also made detectives believe that before Noel died, she had tried to shield herself from her attacker. This was due to the defensive wounds to her hands, arm, legs, and feet. The result of the autopsy allowed the couple's death to be ruled as a homicide, and Detective D. Engelman was one of those placed in charge of investigating the case. The first thing he did was interview the friends and families of the deceased couple. One of those that he interviewed first was Noel's sister. When asked about what she knew, she told the detective about the party that had been organized the night before the murder and stated the number of people that had been present. In addition to this, she revealed to the detective that her sister, Noel, was selling marijuana and that the majority of people who had attended the party were there because they wanted to purchase the drug. She also mentioned the missing TV and VCR she had noticed. On the 14th of June, 2017, detectives decided to take a closer look at the items that had been taken from the couple's home. They knew these items could potentially provide the answers that were needed to solve the case. Noel's black mobile phone, which was found in the hallway, was examined for fingerprints. The process was carried out by latent print examiner Pam Shannon. Noel's fingerprints were found all over the phone. However, another fingerprint that did not belong to her was also found on it. Even though it was a partial fingerprint, detectives were not discouraged, but began working round the clock to find a match. At first, they speculated that the fingerprint might belong to Brian, but after checking through their database, they quickly discovered that they were wrong. The fingerprint belongs to 30-year-old Dustin, the couple's friend. Detectives realized that Dustin was among the people they had not interviewed and decided to do just that. The interview was conducted on June 17, 2017, which was a day before both Noel and Brian's bodies were laid to rest. What detectives saw Dustin sat down for an interview with them was a man who was still mourning the loss of his friends. When questioned, Dustin revealed that he had known Noel and her sister for about 20 years, and went on to talk about the good times they had spent together. He told detectives that he was often at Noel and Brian's house due to how close he was with them. When asked about the drug trade the couple was involved in, he responded that he was aware of it. Dustin also said that Noel had about 2 to 3 pounds of marijuana, which was worth a lot of money. But according to him, no drug deal occurred on the night of the party. He also told Detective Engelman that after leaving the party, he had gone straight to his mother's house, also located within the city. He had not stayed there for long, and had later gone on to a friend's trailer in New Haven, and that was where he spent the night. After all this, Detective Engelman had one final question for him. He looked Dustin in the eyes and asked if he went back to Noel and Brian's apartment after leaving that night. Dustin responded that he hadn't, and with this, he was allowed to go home. Detectives decided to interview the friend whose trailer Dustin claimed he had spent the night at. On the 20th of June 2017, which was 10 days after the murder, Dustin's friend was interviewed by detectives, and he was able to confirm that all that Dustin had said was the truth. He told them that he had been at work when Dustin arrived at his home, but he was able to get in because he had a spare key. With this, detectives had no further leads in the case, and the heat of the investigation died down. Dustin remained on the police's radar. They strongly believed that he knew more than he was telling them. However, due to a lack of solid evidence, they could only watch and wait. It would take more than a year for the investigation to pick up once again. Detectives were able to locate an individual who had been in contact with Dustin at the time of the murders. The individual, whose identity was not revealed, told detectives that Dustin had called him on the morning of June 10, 2017, saying that he had a large amount of marijuana he wanted to sell. According to the unidentified individual, Dustin sounded uneasy over the phone. The marijuana he was trying to sell was high grade and was about 1 to 2 pounds. He told detectives that he had been surprised by the offer and wondered how Dustin had gotten the drug in his possession. This was because at the time, Dustin was broke and there was no way he could have bought so much. After this revelation, Dustin shot to the top of the detective's suspect list. To confirm that what the unidentified individual had told them was the truth, they took a look at cell phone records, and it showed that phone calls had been exchanged between Dustin and the unidentified individual on the morning of the murder. Almost 3 months after this, detectives interviewed Dustin once more. This time around, the interview was not conducted by Detective Engelman, but by Detective Brian Martin, also of the Fort Wayne Police Department. Dustin maintained all he had said the last time he was interviewed, but this time around, he added that he drank beer and smoked marijuana upon getting to his friend's trailer house in New Haven, and that was where he had been when he heard about the murder. They did not ask him about the marijuana he had allegedly tried to sell, but allowed him to leave. Following this, detectives spoke with Dustin's friend who resided in New Haven, and he confirmed to them that Dustin was selling marijuana from his trailer on the day of the homicide. After this, detectives sat down to carefully review all the available information, and it suddenly dawned on them that nothing they had was solid enough to link Dustin to the murders or build a case against him. They needed something more that would prove beyond reasonable doubt that he had been Noel and Brian's killer. And without this, there was little that could be done. The pace of the investigation slackened, and things went quiet. In the blink of an eye, 5 years had gone by since the murder of Noel and Brian. Then, just when detectives least expected it, another individual came forward and gave them a testimony that helped them finally solve the case. The individual was a man by the name of Tyler. He had not been happy with the way the investigation had dragged on for years, and so he decided to speak to the authorities and tell them everything he knew about the murder. "I just felt like I had to do the right thing," Tyler said. On July 28, 2022, Tyler was interviewed by detectives after telling them that he knew something about Noel and Brian's murders. He revealed that he was friends with a man named Dean, and during one of their conversations, Dean had once informed him that his half-brother had carried out the killing. As it turns out, the half-brother who Dean had been talking about was none other than Dustin. According to what Dean told Tyler, Dustin had gone to the couple's house in the early hours of June 10, 2017 to steal some marijuana. He had believed that no one would be at home, armed with only a knife. He had climbed through a window into the house and had proceeded to the bedroom to look for what he had gone there to steal. However, the noise he made woke Brian, and upon seeing that his cover was blown, he stabbed him. In the commotion, Noel also woke up and Dustin stabbed her as well. She had, however, put up a fight, and he had responded by stabbing her multiple times. He had bragged to Dean that he stabbed her so hard in the face that the knife got stuck, and he had to put a foot on her body and pull to retrieve the knife. After killing the couple, he had stole the marijuana and gone to his friend's place in New Haven, where he burnt his bloody clothes in a fire pit. By the time Tyler finished his narration, detectives could hardly believe their ears. They knew that with the testimony, the case was closer to being solved than ever, but they had to confirm Tyler's word, and for this, they interviewed Dean, Dustin's half-brother. Throughout the interview, his words were consistent with what Tyler had earlier told them. On the 31st of October 2022, Dustin's cell phone was analyzed by an FBI detective. It was a final and important step that had to be taken to ensure that they were not chasing shadows. Well, as it turned out, the results of the analysis showed that Dustin had been near Noel and Brian's residence between 6:20 a.m. 6:04 a.m. on June 10, 2017, which was the day of the murder. This was in contrast to what he told detectives about not going back there after leaving the party. In December 2022, officers arrested Dustin in Wells County and charged him with 2 counts of murder, 2 counts of felony murder, and 2 counts of robbery resulting in bodily injury. Detectives are pleased that they had finally brought the case to a close by making the arrest. They were also grateful for the witnesses who came forward and provided crucial information that was helpful to the case. If it was your family, your loved one who was taken from you in a violent way, you would want someone with that information to come forward. You would hope they would do it right away. But if they come forward at all and can provide that information and sit down with us, it usually brings good stuff to the case. We can use and move forward with evidence, Detective Martin told the media following Dustin's arrest. At the moment, Dustin remains in jail, awaiting punishment for his crime. It is a relief that Noel and Brian's murder has been finally solved, and through this, their families have been able to get the much-needed closure that they deserve. Case of Lacy Peterson. Lacy Rocha was born on May 4, 1975 to Sharon and Dennis, but her parents divorced when she and her older brother Brent were still young. After the divorce, Lacy's mother married Ron, a dairy farmer, who became a father figure to her and played a significant role in her upbringing. Lacy was a cheerful and outgoing person with an infectious smile and bubbly nature. She loved talking to people and was always eager to engage in conversations, which made her a natural attention seeker. She thrived in social situations and was known for her ability to light up a room with her presence. Growing up on a dairy farm, Lacy developed a strong connection with nature. She spent much of her childhood exploring the outdoors and enjoying the beauty that surrounded her. One of her favorite activities was gardening with her mother, which became a source of joy and fulfillment for both of them. Lacy's love for gardening would later influence her interests and career choices as an adult. Lacy was a cheerleader at Thomas Downey High School, which was a great fit for her outgoing and bubbly personality. She made a strong impression on her school and became the ideal cheerleader. After graduating, Lacy attended California Polytechnic University, where she studied ornamental horticulture due to her interest in plants and wildlife. Lacy frequently visited a friend who worked at a restaurant in Morro Bay. It was there that she met Scott Peterson, a co-worker of her friend. Lacy was immediately attracted to Scott and was smitten. She took the initiative and gave Scott her phone number. Scott quickly reached out and they surprisingly hit it off during their first conversation. Scott then asked Lacy on their first date, a deep-sea fishing trip. However, things didn't go as planned for Lacy, who ended up getting seasick. After a rocky start, Lacy and Scott's relationship blossomed, and they eventually decided to live together. Before meeting Lacy, Scott had aspirations to become a professional golfer, but as their relationship progressed, his focus shifted, and he chose to pursue a career in business instead. Lacy graduated from Cal Poly in 1997, and Scott followed suit the next year. This milestone marked the beginning of a new era in their lives, full of promise and potential. On August 9, 1997, the couple tied the knot in Isla Valley, San Luis Obispo County. The beautiful resort setting provided a stunning backdrop for their special day. Surrounded by friends and family, they celebrated their love and solidified their commitment to each other. After getting married, Lacy and Scott embarked on a new business venture, opening a sports bar called The Shack in San Luis Obispo, California. The Shack, owned by Lacy and Scott, started off slowly but eventually attracted a steady stream of customers, with weekends being particularly busy. After several successful years, the couple decided to sell the bar in 2000, seeking new opportunities despite its stable income. Following the sale, they moved to Lacy's hometown of Modesto, California, and purchased a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom home in an upscale neighborhood in October 2000. Lacy took on a part-time job as a substitute teacher, while Scott worked for a European fertilizer company. Lacy devoted herself to supporting Scott, taking care of the home, cooking, and cleaning. She made sure their home was always warm and inviting. In 2002, the couple received exciting news. Lacy was pregnant, and they were expecting a baby. Lacy and Scott were expecting a baby boy, with a due date set for February 10, 2003. They had already chosen the name Connor for their unborn child. On December 24, 2002, Scott stated that he left their house at 9:30 a.m. to go fishing at the Berkeley Marina. Scott said he left Lacy at home on Christmas Eve morning, with a busy day ahead of her. She was planning to watch a Martha Stewart show, clean the floor, bake Christmas cookies, and walk their dog, Mackenzie, at the park. However, one of their neighbors found Mackenzie wandering outside their home around 10:30 a.m. and returned the dog to their backyard. When Scott came home from fishing that afternoon, he said the house was empty, with Mackenzie in the yard, but no sign of Lacy. Her car was still parked in the driveway. Scott claimed he showered and washed his dirty fishing clothes as soon as he got home. After his shower, Scott realized Lacy was missing and became concerned. He called her mother and stepfather, Sharon and Ron, but they hadn't heard from her all day and were worried about her safety. As the day went on and Lacy remained missing, Scott and Sharon decided to report her disappearance to the police around 6 p.m. They stressed to the police how urgent it was to find Lacy, who was 7 months pregnant with their baby, Connor. The police then questioned Scott out about his whereabouts and activities on the day Lacy vanished. Scott told police he went fishing at the Berkeley Marina, about 90 miles from his home in Modesto, where he lived with his pregnant wife Lacy. However, from the start, police suspected foul play in Lacy's disappearance. Initially, police didn't treat Lacy's case as suspicious after Scott and his mother-in-law filed a missing person report. Lacy's family defended Scott, and the couple seemed perfect, making it hard to imagine Scott harming his wife. As the investigation continued, police grew suspicious of Scott. About a month after Lacy vanished, they made a stunning discovery. Scott had 2 secret affairs and a long-term relationship with Amber Fry, who contacted police on December 30, 2002, after learning Scott was a suspect in Lacy's disappearance. Amber said she met Scott on November 20, 2002, and thought he was single. 2 weeks before Lacy's disappearance, Scott told Amber that he was a widower and that the upcoming Christmas would be his first without his wife. This revelation raised suspicions among the police, who wondered if Scott had already planned to kill his pregnant wife. To gather evidence, the police asked Amber to make a recorded phone call to Scott, hoping to capture a potential confession. The police informed Lacy's family about Scott's infidelities, and it was when they showed Lacy's mother a photo of Scott and Amber together that she became convinced of his guilt. The search for Lacy was highly comprehensive due to the involvement of the police, her loved ones, and numerous volunteers. In the first 2 days alone, more than 900 people participated in the search efforts. During a press conference, a police officer working on Lacy's case raised concerns that she may not have left her house voluntarily on December 24, 2002. Lacy's disappearance sparked widespread media attention, with the tragic and intriguing tale of a beautiful young woman vanishing from her home on Christmas Eve, captivating the public's imagination. As the public sought answers and speculated about her disappearance, the spotlight on Lacy's case intensified. When Lacy Peterson vanished on December 24, 2002, a $25,000 reward was initially offered for information leading to her safe return. As the investigation yielded no leads, the reward was increased to $500,000 to boost awareness and gather more information. To keep Lacy's case in the public eye, posters were prominently displayed in Modesto, California, and a friend's husband created a website to spread the word. Months later, on April 13, 2003, a couple walking their dog in Richmond's Point Isabel Regional Shoreline Park stumbled upon a gruesome discovery in a marshy area. They found the decomposing body of a male infant. The next day, another person discovered the body of a pregnant woman on the east side of the bay shore, about a mile away from where the baby was found. On April 18, 2003, DNA tests confirmed that the bodies were indeed those of Lacy and her unborn son, Connor. Lacy and Connor were laid to rest at Burwood Cemetery. The autopsy revealed disturbing evidence. The baby had 1.5 loops of nylon tape around his neck and a significant cut on his body. Lacy's autopsy showed even more brutal injuries. 2 cracked ribs, her upper torso hollowed out with internal organs removed, and she was missing her head and limbs. The medical examiner concluded that the baby died in the womb and was expelled from Lacy's body after her death. Investigators from the FBI and Modesto Police Department searched the home of Scott and Lacy, looking for evidence of their involvement in her disappearance. The search turned up several crucial clues, including a hair found in Scott's pliers on his fishing boat. After analyzing the hair, the FBI matched it to Lacy's DNA. In addition to the home search, the FBI also thoroughly examined Scott's truck and warehouse, seeking any evidence linking him to Lacy's disappearance. The FBI searched Scott's boat and found a homemade anchor that he claimed was made from a 90-pound bag of concrete, which he had used to repair his driveway. However, the prosecution believed that Scott had created multiple anchors and used 4 of them to weigh down Lacy's body in San Francisco Bay. The bodies found in the bay were later identified as Lacy and Connor, leading to Scott's arrest near a golf course. Notably, Scott's appearance had changed significantly. His dark brown hair was now blonde. When arrested, Scott's vehicle was found to be packed with various items, including a large sum of cash, survival gear, and camping equipment. The police also discovered 4 cell phones and 2 driver's licenses, one belonging to Scott and the other linked to his brother. This evidence suggested to the police that Scott was attempting to flee the state. Scott's father offered an alternative explanation for the driver's license found in Scott's possession. According to his father, Scott had borrowed his brother's license to get a discount at a golf course. As for why Scott's car was packed, his father claimed it was because Scott was living out of his car to avoid the media, who were camping outside his house at the time. Scott's trial began in June 2004, a year after his arrest. During the opening arguments, the prosecution presented its case to the jury, arguing that Scott had killed Lacy because of his affair with Amber Frey. The prosecution highlighted Scott's suspicious behavior in the days leading up to and following Lacy's disappearance, pointing out inconsistencies in his statements to the police. Scott initially told the police he was fishing on the day Lacy went missing, but later told others he was golfing. The prosecution also noted that Scott asked the police if they had used cadaver dogs to search a park where Lacy was supposed to walk their dog, implying that Scott was aware of the potential crime scene and trying to cover his tracks. Scott's defense team presented a strong argument in court, highlighting that Scott's history of infidelity did not necessarily prove he was guilty of murdering his wife. They reasoned that Scott would not give up his life for someone he had only dated 4 times. The defense suggested that Lacy's hair might have been found in Scott's boat because she had visited the marina with him before. During the trial, 2 of Lacy's relatives testified that Scott showed no emotional response when his pregnant wife went missing. New evidence emerged when a realtor testified that Scott tried to sell their home in January, a month after Lacy's disappearance. Additionally, a salesman revealed that Scott traded in Lacy's car after she vanished. The prosecution viewed these events as incriminating evidence against Scott. Amber Frey, Scott's mistress, took the stand and shared details of their affair. The jury listened to secret recordings of Amber's phone calls with Scott, including one where he lied about being in Paris when he was actually attending a vigil for his missing wife. During the trial, a hydrologist and tide expert testified that it was possible for Lacy's body to have been dumped in the area where Scott claimed to be fishing on the day Lacy went missing. However, the defense team argued that there was a lack of credible evidence directly linking Scott to the crime. Their theory was that someone had kidnapped Lacy on Christmas Eve 2002, holding her captive until she gave birth to Connor and then disposing of both bodies in the San Francisco Bay. The defense attorney emphasized that there was no concrete evidence to connect Scott directly to the crime and that other suspects could have been responsible. A significant issue arose during the trial when a juror was removed and replaced with an alternate due to misconduct. The dismissed juror had conducted unauthorized research on the case, violating legal procedures. Additionally, the foreman of the jury asked to be removed, and it was determined that his removal was necessary to ensure a fair and just trial. On November 12, 2004, a California jury found Scott guilty of 2 murder counts: first-degree murder for killing his wife Lacy, and second-degree murder for killing their unborn son Connor. The charge of first-degree murder for Lacy's killing carried special circumstances because of the involvement of the fetus, making Scott eligible for the death penalty. After his conviction, the trial entered the penalty phase to determine his punishment. In this phase, the jury considered various factors, including Scott's prior criminal history, circumstances that aggravated the crime, and circumstances that mitigated it. The jury unanimously agreed that Scott should receive the death penalty. After reviewing the evidence, the judge upheld the jury's verdict. He concluded that Lacy's murder was cruel, uncaring, heartless, and callous, which led to Scott being sentenced to death. As is automatic in such cases, the sentence was appealed, and the California Supreme Court heard the case in June 2020. During the appeal, Scott's lawyers presented several arguments. They claimed that some potential jurors were unfairly dismissed, that 2 jurors were improperly allowed onto Scott's boat, and that the trial should have been moved to a different county due to biased questionnaire results, which showed that almost half of the potential jurors thought Scott was guilty before the trial even started. The state counted that there was no evidence to support the claim that any juror was unfairly dismissed, and that none of the 12 jurors who ultimately decided Scott's fate were biased. In August 2020, the United States Supreme Court upheld Scott's conviction, but overturned his death sentence. In 2004, a judge resentenced Scott to life in prison without parole, which led to his transfer from San Quentin State Prison to Mule Creek State Prison in Ione, California. Around the same time, on April 1, 2004, President George W. Bush signed the Unborn Victims of Violence Act, UVVA, into law. Lacy's mother and stepfather attended the signing ceremony. Lacy and Connor's law was designed to provide legal protection for unborn children in cases where their mothers were victims of violence. The legislation recognizes the unborn child as a separate legal entity from their mother, making it a crime to harm or kill the unborn child during an attack on a pregnant woman. The law acknowledges that an unborn child is a victim of violence and deserves the same rights and protections as any other human being. Manhattan, New York. With the densest population, Manhattan is geographically the smallest of the 5 boroughs of New York City. Situated on one of the world's largest natural harbors, it is mostly made up of Manhattan Island. Other than its cultural offerings and iconic scenic beauty, the city is known for its towering skyscrapers, including the Empire State Building, neon-lit Times Square, and the theaters of Broadway. Even with such a reputation, the Inwood area of Manhattan became a subject of grim headlines after the discovery of human remains in the summer of 1991. On the early summer morning of July 23, 1991, the New York City Police Department of Washington Heights 34th Precinct received a chilling call regarding a gruesome discovery. 2 construction workers were repairing a southbound lane along the Henry Hudson Parkway, about 40 miles off of Dickman Street in Manhattan, New York, when they noticed a foul odor from the wooded embankment area off the road. The smell only grew stronger and eventually led the construction workers to a blue and white igloo cooler. After finding the source of the overpowering smell, the workers began to open the lid of the cooler. When they discovered a few cans of Coke, Underneath those cans there was a black plastic bag that contained what seemed like human remains. When the NYPD detectives approached the scene, at first glance, they were not sure if the remains really belonged to a human. This was assumed given the fact that the place was used as an illegal dump site where people often dumped their waste along with deceased animals. However, an inspection of the garbage proved otherwise, as the skeletal remains were quickly determined to be human. Inside the garbage bag, the young female child was lying in a fetal position, with her hands clasped together, bound with rope and a cord from Venetian blinds. The decomposing body was completely naked and bloated. In addition to the Coke cans, the garbage bag was also surrounded by water, which the investigators suspected to originally be ice. They estimated she had been dead 6 to 8 days before the cooler was found. They believed she was dead for a week, and the hot sunlight not only melted the ice, but popped several of the cans, causing soda to leak out and destroy forensic evidence such as fingerprints and DNA. The body was then taken to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy. Although identifying the body was impossible due to the level of decomposition, the autopsy result brought out several significant details regarding the cause of death and the physical characteristics of the victim. The coroner determined that the child was either white or Hispanic, and aged between 3 to 5 years. She had long, wavy dark hair, which was pulled back in a ponytail. The child was also believed to be extremely malnourished, weighing only 28 pounds, which was quite low compared to children of her age. The report also indicated that the young girl had been sexually abused and died on or about July 18, 1991, as a result of asphyxiation. Without a doubt, the findings suggested that the little girl was regularly tortured before her short life came to an abrupt end. Unfortunately, no other clue was found that could lead to the identification of the poor child. Clearly, the NYPD detectives were landed with the daunting task of not only identifying the victim, but also tracking down her killer. In the neighborhood of Inwood, Manhattan, which was considered to be a place of rampant crimes, this crime stood out as a symbol of sheer brutality. In an attempt to crack this case, the NYPD detectives tried out every tactic they could possibly think of. From distributing flyers to urging the people to come forward if they had any knowledge about this Jane Doe. Police tried everything but came up empty-handed. The murder received plenty of attention from both the police department and the media back then, and investigators had every reason to believe that someone would soon come forward with information. And people did come forward. In the initial phase of the investigation, countless tips came in. One of the tips included a call from a woman that came in just 6 days after the remains were discovered. The caller, who did not identify herself, said on a Sunday in July 1991, she was going to a wedding, and from the toll booth of the Hudson, they saw a Hispanic man in fleece and a Hispanic woman in heels walking north on the parkway with a picnic cooler in their hand. The lead seemed legit but did not go anywhere, and in the end the woman denied cooperating with the police by helping them create a sketch. There were other tips, including a young female drug addict who claimed the girl was her niece and a grieving grandmother who insisted the child was her granddaughter, both of which yielded no results. Sadly, every other lead NYPD detectives followed hit a dead end eventually. Detectives scanned through the National Missing Children databases, but nothing panned out, leaving the deceased child without a name. As the mystery deepened in the case, so did the affection of the detectives for the little Jane Doe. Since no one knew the girl's name and the cops had no way of identifying her, she was given the name Baby Hope, because by then, hope was all they had left in their attempts to solve the Jane Doe case, and they truly hoped that it wouldn't take long for justice to prevail. After a few days of investigation, an anthropologist developed an enhanced sketch based on the bone structure of Baby Hope and distributed it to the media. This was the first sketch that showed what she might have looked like, but even this effort remained fruitless. For nearly 2 years, Jane Doe's corpse remained in the NYPD morgue when detectives decided it was finally time to let her go. In those 2 years, no family members came forward to claim her, and the NYPD took the responsibility upon themselves to provide her with a proper burial with their own money. On July 23, 1993, on the second anniversary of Baby Hope's remains being found, uniformed cops from NYPD carried the tiny coffin of Jane Doe, which was led by 8 children, to the Campbell Funeral Home on Wadsworth Avenue, Manhattan. The lead detective, Jerry Giorgio, actively participated in the funeral while his wife bought a white dress for baby Hope to offer their affection for a stranger they only knew by death. Not only the detectives, but the community also played their part. More than 500 people from the neighborhood attended the funeral while praying for justice for the little girl. She was buried at St. Raymond's Cemetery in the Bronx with the name of baby Hope etched on her black headstone. Over the years, both the detectives from the NYPD and the people from the community periodically visited her grave and left her things in her honor. Without any solid leads to go on, the investigation into baby Hope's case went nowhere. Although the NYPD never gave up on this case, the urgency of the case faded away underneath all the new crimes. Throughout the years, there were minor developments in the case, but it mostly remained cold. With every anniversary of baby Hope's murder, local media in New York ran the story in hopes of refreshing the memories of a potential witness or spreading awareness of this horrific crime. The efforts always fell short, and the case remained cold. By 2000, there were many new technologies and forensic profile developments that were introduced into the criminal system, which were not available back in the 90s. Seeing that the technologies were proving to be helpful in other cold cases, the NYPD attempted to utilize these techniques in an attempt to build a forensic DNA profile on baby Hope and run it through all missing children's databases. But that effort remained unsuccessful. As technology continued to progress, baby Hope's body was exhumed for DNA tests 2 times in the span of 4 years. The first one in 2006 and the second one in 2011. None of them proved to be significant, as detectives were still not able to unveil the mystery of baby Hope's identity. With encouragement from the public, the NYPD reopened the case in 2013, in July of the same year, on the occasion of the 22nd anniversary of the discovery of baby Hope. The NYPD tried another round of publicity on the case. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood where her body was found, hung flyers, and distributed the sketches of the girl and a photograph of the cooler. They even announced a $12,000 reward for information leading to an arrest. Their efforts finally got a breakthrough in the case for the first time in 2 decades. After seeing the flyers, a woman called the New York City Crime Stoppers, the tip line for New York City, to share some valuable information. She shared with police a conversation she had overheard in a laundromat 2 years ago, in which a woman claimed that baby Hope might have been her sister. The tipster also provided several pieces of information to the police regarding the woman's family. This tip led the investigators to a 27-year married Brooklyn mother of 3, Laurencita Lorena Ramirez. As investigators knocked on Lorena's door and she opened it, they're met with a shocking mirror image of baby Hope if she were alive then. Lorena had a striking resemblance to the police sketch of baby Hope, almost providing reassurance to the detectives that they might have come to the right place. So, without wasting any time, detectives began questioning Lorena about her missing sister. Lorena said that she had not remembered anything about one of her sisters being missing, even her name. That was until Lorena was 11. And her younger sister, Maribel, rejoined her family after staying with her father's family for years. It was Maribel who told Lorena that she remembered being suddenly awoken by something one night. She then went on to witness her sister's body being stuffed into a refrigerator and placed into a cooler later on. She also remembered looking to the other room and seeing plastic bags placed on the ground along with the conversation between 2 adults, which included the sentence, "She doesn't fit." However, neither Maribel nor Lorena ever came out with this information. Lorena did not even link baby Hope's case to these memories until a few months after the anniversary of the discovery of remains, when she was watching it on a TV channel. The story was eerily convenient as far as baby Hope's murder was concerned. However, investigators needed a parent for a DNA match, which led them to Lorena's mother. With assistance from Lorena, detectives did not waste much time tracking down her mother, Margarita Castillo, not far from her daughter Lorena. Margarita, at the time, resided in Washington Heights in Queens, New York. However, as eager as investigators were to talk to her, Margarita did not reciprocate the same feelings. She was not interested to talk to the investigators and turned them down before the investigators legally obtained an envelope that had Margarita's DNA on it. The test results of this DNA came back with the answer detectives had been searching for over 2 decades. Margarita Castillo was the biological mother of baby Hope. With tears in her eyes, Margarita agreed to talk only when she saw the DNA result and the composite sketch of baby Hope. Margarita let the investigators know that baby Hope was indeed her long-lost daughter, Angelica Castillo. After decades of lying nameless in a Manhattan cemetery, baby Hope finally got her name back. However, this revelation created more questions than answers. One of the most significant of them was why Margarita would never report her daughter missing in the first place. Claiming that she only acted that way because she had no knowledge of Angelica being missing, Margarita began to tell the investigators the story of how she became estranged from her own daughter. Angelica was born on April 24, 1987, to her mother, Margarita Castillo, and her father, Genaro Ramirez. Despite having several children, the couple's marital life was rocky, as Margarita was scared of Genaro, who had a reputation for being abusive. Just after a few years of Angelica's birth, Margarita and Genaro separated as a result of their regular fights. According to Margarita, it was after one of those fights in 1991 that she took her 3 daughters with her and left the home. The next day, Genaro called her, saying that he wanted to meet his daughters. Though still angry due to his behavior, Margarita accepted, considering Genaro was still the father of the girls. As per Genaro's instructions, Margarita brought the girls to the house of his adult niece, where he was already present. After spending the night there, Margarita decided to leave the next day, when Genaro had a strange request for her. He wanted her to leave their 2 younger daughters, Angelica and Maribel, with him and take the older Lorena with her. Margarita, who was well aware of his violent nature, knew that it was not just a request but a threat. Despite not agreeing to the arrangement, Margarita left her younger daughters with him. Margarita also said that she often visited the girls after being forced to leave them with their father and brought them little gifts. During one visit, she saw that her estranged husband wasn't around. She asked the niece, Velvina Juarez Ramirez, if she could take her kids back, which Velvina rejected, saying that her uncle would be upset if she let the kids go. Margarita claimed that she kept visiting the place until one day the family moved, without informing her or leaving any address. Margarita had no idea where her estranged husband or daughters were. In 1995, 4 years after baby Hope's remains were found, Margarita got a call from a woman saying that Velvina had passed away. Margarita headed to the location and inquired about her daughters after giving her condolences to the deceased. Unfortunately, nobody in the family told her about the whereabouts of her 2 daughters, and she came home empty-handed. It was only later that another call from the same woman requesting her to pick up her daughter, referring only to Maribel, that she realized that there was something terribly wrong. She was then informed that Maribel was the only daughter who had been there all along, while nobody had any clue where Angelica was. Although Margarita suspected Genaro of being responsible for Angelica's disappearance, she never went to the police to report her daughter missing. Asserting an explanation for her actions, Margarita said that since her family had illegally immigrated from Mexico and she did not speak English and only spoke Spanish, she was scared to go to the police. Though Margarita accepted her fate, never taking a stand for her own daughter, detectives were dedicated to providing their precious baby Hope with justice. They now considered General Ramirez as the prime suspect in his daughter's disappearance and murder, and a massive search began for him. Unfortunately, to this day, no information about his whereabouts have come to light, as he continues to be a missing person. Yet some people, including Margarita, believe he fled the US and returned to his home country, Mexico. When tracking down Angelica's father failed, everyone thought the mystery of baby Hope's brutal murder would never be solved until police pointed their fingers at another man. The man was none other than Angelica's own cousin on her father's side and Velvina's brother, then 30-year-old Conrado Juarez Ramirez. Juarez was a regular visitor of the home where Angelica and Maribel were living under the care of Velvina and 5 other relatives in an apartment in Astoria, Queens. Juarez had a long criminal history comprising different kinds of crime, including sexual assault. Surprisingly, his family still let him hang around the children. Based on past records, NYPD detectives wanted to zero in on this guy and went looking for him. They waited in front of the Manhattan restaurant where he worked as a dishwasher and later brought him in for questioning. Although he was asked questions regarding Angelica's disappearance, detectives still suspected Angelica's father to be the one responsible until Juarez dropped a bombshell. After initially denying it a few hours into the questioning, 52-year-old Juarez began confessing to the murder. He revealed that in July 1991, he was visiting his sister, Belvina, in her Queens apartment, when one night he came back to find 4-year-old Angelica in the hallway in the middle of the night. Angelica was seemingly looking to go to the bathroom when Juarez took her by the hand into his room and she went with him. At some point, Juarez claimed that alcohol made him lose control and he tried to sexually molest her, and she started screaming. To keep her quiet, Juarez bound the little girl to the table, which was often done to her to stop her from getting food or water. He claimed that he did not intend to harm her and only suffocated her to stop her from crying. He then took a pillow and suffocated her until she went motionless. After he was done, he summoned his sister Belvina, who was in another room. Shocked by the incident, she began yelling at him, before quickly deciding they had to get rid of the body instead of notifying the police. Juarez claimed that it was Belvina who gave him a cooler that was in the garage and had a conversation about how they would fit the girl inside it, the very conversation Maribel had heard that night and later revealed to her sister. After binding Angelica's hands and feet, Juarez stuffed the lifeless body inside the cooler, almost in half, and placed Coke cans over it, so that it wouldn't look suspicious. The pair then hailed a cab from Astoria to Washington Heights and disposed of the cooler in the wooded area. It was later discovered. Eerily, Juarez's confession perfectly aligned with the tip where a woman saw a Hispanic man and a Hispanic woman carrying a cooler a few days before the discovery, suggesting it was legit all along. Hoping that the remains would never be discovered, the pair parted their separate ways, never to talk about this again. In 1995, Belvina died, taking the disturbing secret to her grave, while Juarez went on with his life as if nothing happened. In this interview with police, Juarez also revealed that Angelica was mistreated and tortured at the hands of Belvina and her family on a regular basis for the last 2 years of her life. From starving to being harshly punished, the little girl went through an unspeakable amount of suffering in her already short life. It was finally time for her to get justice as investigators took Juarez into their custody and charged him with first-degree murder. Police would later learn that at one time when Margarita demanded that Juarez let her see her girls, Juarez responded by saying that when he returned from Mexico, there was only one girl and that the other girl was dead. Detectives who had held baby Hope close to their hearts all those years were disgusted by the fact that even after that, Margarita never went to the police or looked for her daughter. When the mother was asked in an interview what she would say to her dead daughter, she replied, "I would ask her to forgive me, that I wish I could have stopped him before he could hurt her." Unfortunately, after initially confessing to Angelica's murder, Conrado Juarez Ramirez recanted his words. This time, he claimed that his sister, Belvina, called him on his cell phone one night in July 1991, describing that Angelica had fallen down the stairs and she needed his help to dispose of her body. He then admitted that he helped her bind the child's body. Then he and Belvina drove to the Henry Hudson Parkway, where they dumped her body. After the recantation, prosecutors were having a hard time building a case against him. They were worried due to no forensic evidence linking Juarez to the murder. After Belvina's death, there was no potential witness either. While the investigators persisted that he described many things that only a killer would know, the defense focused more on the forensic evidence. Eventually, the case would come to conclusion, after 22 years of a long battle, but not in a way anybody would have wanted. While in jail in 2018, 52-year-old Conrado Juarez Ramirez passed away after falling ill, pending his trial in Manhattan Supreme Court the following year. The case was officially closed after the only suspect was killed. As for Angelica's father, Genaro Ramirez, investigators concluded that although he might have other potential victims of his own, he was most likely unaware of his daughter's fate once he left home and never came back. There is no doubt that this poor 4-year-old girl had been through a lot before tragically being murdered and left to rot. Yet it's amazing to see strangers pouring out their love for her while her own family failed and betrayed her. We can only hope that the little one could rest in peace with her name on her gravestone after 2 decades. In the summer of 2003, the body of 36-year-old Sabrina Payne was found in a field near Tremont, Illinois. Sabrina was a black female who was known to support a drug habit with prostitution. Sabrina had last been seen at her home 2 days before her body was found. The original autopsy failed to determine a cause of death, leaving some of the detectives to believe she had overdosed. One detective, however, felt uneasy about that assumption. His suspicions were confirmed as more bodies were found in Peoria and Tacuil counties over the next year. On February 5, 2004, the body of 36-year-old Barbara Williams was found in a ditch near Edwards, Illinois. She was found partially clothed and lying face down in the snow. She had been seen alive between 9 and 10 p.m. the night before. An autopsy showed that she had multiple contusions and abrasions on her body. Toxicology showed that she had fatal levels of cocaine in her blood. At this point, police were not ready to call this a murder or entertain the idea of a serial killer preying on black drug-addicted prostitutes. In a told her of 2004, 32-year-old Shakonda Thomas was reported missing. She had last been seen by her family in August. Shakonda was known to disappear at times, but when she didn't come back after several weeks, her family reported her missing. Shirley and Trapp was also reported missing in the late summer of 2004. She was seen 3 days before she was reported missing. Tamara Walls was reported missing in September of 2004 after not being seen for 3 weeks. All 3 missing women were also black females known to support a crack cocaine habit with prostitution. 36-year-old mother of 8, Laura Lawler, disappeared from her home after leaving with a man and woman. Her longtime partner searched for her, but only was able to determine she had been with a man named Larry. Her boyfriend and father to her 7 daughters and 1 son describes Laura as the love of his life and a beautiful soul. The two had experimented with crack cocaine, and Laura seemed to struggle with addiction before her disappearance. On September 25, 2004, Linda Neal was found on Keene Road in Tazewell County. She was found noodle on the side of the road. Linda, like the other women, was known to be part of the drug scene in Peoria. At this point, police had determined there was likely a serial killer stalking black females in the Peoria area. A task force was formed, which one detective states would have occurred much quicker if the victims had been white females. While police desperately searched for the killer, they kept a close eye on women in the community at risk. Despite their efforts, on October 15, 2004, Brenda Irving's body was found in a ditch near Farmington. Brenda was found nude, and an autopsy determined that she had been strangled and suffered blunt force trauma to her head. She also had fatal levels of cocaine in her system at the time of her death. Her children had feared for their mother's safety, as she had known many of the women who had been killed or disappeared from central Illinois. Brenda struggled with drug addiction. Despite detectives' best efforts, the case proved difficult to solve. They followed thousands of leads, but finally got the lead they were waiting for in December of 2004. 35-year-old Thick Bomer was arrested for theft. From jail, she told authorities that she thought she could help them find the serial killer preying on her fellow sex workers. She believed that a man who had picked her up in July 2004 was responsible. Bomer explained that in July, a man named Larry Bright lured her to his mother's home where they shared alcohol and drugs. Once she was intoxicated, she said Bright attacked her, attempted to rape her, and pulled a knife on her. Somehow, Bomer was able to escape. Police were at first skeptical, as Bomer asked for a plea deal in exchange for her testimony. Why hadn't she reported this back in July? Why wait until she was under arrest? Vicky Bomer claimed she was scared of being arrested for outstanding warrants, which is why she did not come forward in July 2004. A search of her criminal history confirmed the warrants, so detectives decided to take a look at the man named Larry Bright. Larry Dean Bright was born in Peoria, Illinois, on July 8, 1966. He served a 2-year stint in prison at age 19 for burglary and carjacking. According to Larry's family, the time Larry spent in prison changed him for the worse. Larry became more angry and violent and began using drugs. Larry had an injury, which started an addiction to prescription opioids and later crack cocaine. He also developed an addiction to pornography, preferring videos with black lemon. Larry lived with his mother in a tiny guest house behind her home. Larry enjoyed gardening, creating a beautiful garden bed of flowers for his mother. When the police arrived at Larry's home following the tip, they noticed the beautiful flowers in the garden. Larry was placed under arrest for the unlawful restraint of Vicky. They questioned Larry about the murders, but he denied having any information about the murdered and missing women. Throughout the interview, Larry smoked several cigarettes. Detectives planned to take one of the cigarette butts and test it for DNA, but Larry ate them before leaving the interrogation room. Larry declined to give DNA voluntarily. Police searched Larry Bright's home on January 20th, 2005. The investigators dug up the garden, finding several small bone fragments and ashes that were later determined to be human. When the police questioned Larry again, they told him they were digging up his mother's flowers. At this point, Larry broke down and confessed to multiple murders. He even led investigators to the remains of some of his victims. Larry explained that around July 27, 2003, he picked up Sabrina Payne on the south side of Peoria. He drove her to his home, which he shared with his mother. He claimed the two drank and used cocaine before having consensual sex. Larry said he did not intend to tell Sabrina, but he became enraged, thinking Sabrina was trying to rip him off. He strangled her to death and dumped her body near the cornfield where she was found. Larry confessed to picking up Barbara Williams in February 2004. Again, he used drugs and alcohol with his victim. He stated that he once again lost control of his anger and killed Barbara. He claimed he caught Barbara stealing from him. He dumped her body along the road where she was found the next day. The prosecution believed that after the first two murders, Larry developed a bloodlust. At the time of his arrest, he said, "I knew them I would till the others I would pick up. I went out hunting." Larry also confessed to killing Laura Lauer. He burned her body in his backyard burn pit, burying the remains in his mother's yard. He said he wanted to destroy the bodies to avoid getting caught. He confessed to killing Tamara Walls and burning her remains. Her jawbone was found in the backyard. He admitted to strangling, beating, and burning Shirley in trap. Chaconda Thomas had the same fate after being picked up by Larry Bright. He burned the woman and buried the ashes in the yard. Because of his attempts to crony his victims, he was nicknamed the Bone Crusher. Larry said that he attempted to burn Linda Neal and Brenda Irving as well, but the attempts were unsuccessful due to the weather. He dunked both women along the side of the road. Larry was facing the death penalty following his January 2005 arrest. In an attempt to spare his mother the embarrassment of a trial and avoid the death penalty, Larry Bright pleaded guilty to 7 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of drug-induced homicide on May 30th, 2006. Bright's murders were not considered racially motivated, but detectives believe he was just attracted to black women. He is one of the very few serial killers who chooses victims outside of his race. Larry was sentenced to 7 life sentences without the possibility of parole to be served concurrently. He was also given an additional 30 years for the drug-induced homicide. As part of the plea deal, Larry will be required to serve 100% of his sentence with no parole consideration. Larry is currently housed at the Shawnee Correctional Center in Vienna, Illinois. He will spend the rest of his life behind bars, but that brings little peace to the families of his victims. The loved ones of Larry's victims want people to know that the women he killed were more than just drug addicts or prostitutes. They were people. They were mothers, daughters, sisters, and friends. The serial killer dentist of St. Louis, Glennon Engelman. Dr. Glennon Engelman was born on February 6, 1927, in St. Louis, Missouri. Dr. Engelman grew up on the south side of the city and felt a deep connection to his neighborhood. After serving in the military, Dr. Engelman used his GI Bill to go to Washington University and become a dentist. He opened his dental office on the south side of St. Louis, serving the community he had always loved. Dr. Engelman, who went by Glenn, was married to a woman named Edna Ruth, but they divorced in 1956. By 1958, both Glenn and Ruth had remarried. Glenn was operating his dental office and appeared to be successfully serving the St. Louis community. On December 17, 1958, citizens in Forest Park noticed a bloody man stumbling. The man, James Stanley Bullock, soon passed from his injuries. These injuries were caused by a gunshot. No one could figure out why someone would shoot 28-year-old James Bullock. James Bullock was born on April 17, 1931 in DeSoto. He was raised in Shiloh, Illinois by his grandparents and later his aunt after his parents passed away. According to an article from 1938, the then 7-year-old was living with his grandparents in 1938 and enjoyed attending school and fishing. James later served in the military before returning to St. Louis to work and go to college. Back in St. Louis, James met Edna Ruth, the ex-wife of Dr. Glenn Engelman. The two married, and 6 short months later, James was dead. An employee at a local sanitarium initially claimed James was there 4 days before his murder, asking to be admitted because he feared for his life. His wife and aunt said this was not true, as the three had dinner together on that night. According to his widow and aunt, James was not afraid for his life, and they knew no one who would want him dead. However, Edna Ruth benefited greatly from her husband's death. Ruth had life insurance policies totaling $64,088. While under questioning, Edna Ruth made several weird statements, including telling the police she was married before, but her husband did not know. Who was she married to? Her husband's dentist, Dr. Glenn Engelman. Edna Ruth had lied to James and his family and lied on the marriage application about being married before. Police questioned a local career criminal who was out on parole for an assault at the time of the shooting. They weren't able to tie him to the murder of James, but they did note he lived near Dr. Engelman's office. Dr. Engelman and Edna Ruth both refused to take a polygraph test and denied any involvement in the murder of James Bullock. Dr. Engelman's new wife, Ida, refused to be questioned by the police. A patient provided an alibi for Dr. Engelman. However, another witness said that they tried to find someone at the office around the time when the office was empty. Edna Ruth invested part of the funds she received after becoming a widow and a doctor. Been bored being a dentist, so he often ventured into other areas of business. This included buying a trike strip along with a partner, Eric Fry. Dr. Engelman had grown to be close friends with Eric and his wife Sandy. On September 26, 1963, Eric and Dr. Engelman were at the trike strip using dynamite to explode and then fell abandoned cisterns on the property. Eric was lying on his stomach near one of the cisterns when the dynamite exploded quicker than anticipated. Eric was killed instantly and found lying in the bottom of the cistern. Coroner H.D. Steinbeck ruled the death accidental. Mr. Frey's wife had an insurance policy on her husband, which she invested part of into Dr. Engelman's practice. Dr. Engelman divorced Ida and married his third wife, Ruth, in 1967. The couple shared a son, but Ruth heeded a close relationship her husband had with a young woman who worked in his office named Carmen Miranda. Dr. Engelman offered to train Carmen to be a dental assistant in his office. Edna felt uncomfortable with the flirting between the doctor and his young assistant. Dr. Engelman, however, claimed he was trying to help people in his community. He hired Carmen's brother, Nick, as well at one point. Ruth was relieved when Carmen met a married man named Peter home. Just a few months later, however, Carmen and Eric were walking in a rural area in Pacific, Missouri. The couple were exploring an area known to have caves and scenic paths. A shot suddenly fired, hitting Peter in the head. Peter died instantly, and hysterically Carmen fled down to help. Nearby, police found an hex on a tree made with tape. The area was familiar to locals as a hunting area, and police believed that the shot was accidental. Police believe someone was target shooting at the accident accidentally struck Mr. Home. Carmen had a significant amount of life insurance on her husband, totaling $60,000. This is equivalent to around $300,000 in 2024. Dr. Engelman and Ruth divorced soon after, at which time Dr. Engelman married young Carmen, whom he had known since she was a small child. His son lived with Edna, his ex-wife. Despite being married to Carmen, Dr. Engelman and Ruth still met regularly for sex. Dr. Engelman constantly had extramarital affairs, which included previous affairs with Carmen, Ruth, and even Sandy Fry, the wife of his business associate Eric Fry, who was killed by dynamite. Another of Dr. Engelman's affairs was with a patient named Barbara Boyle. On November 3, 1977, someone pretending to be from the farm girl walked up to the farmhouse owned by Arthur and Vernita Goosewell in Edwardsville, Illinois. Soon after entering the home, the elderly couple were attacked and both were shot in the head. The wealthy couple left $340,000 to their son, Ronald Goosewell. Guess who Ronald Goosewell was married to? Barbara Boyle. On April 4, 1979, less than 2 years after the murder of his parents, Ronald Goosewell was found dead inside his car outside a hotel in East St. Louis, Illinois. The man had been beaten and shot to death. He had been missing for 4 days when his body was found. Following her husband's murder, Barbara collected his inheritance in addition to several life insurance policies. The equivalent sum of money today would be nearly $1.7 million. Guess who she cut to? Dr. Glennon Engelman. Following the murder of Mahmod Goosewell, authorities were starting to notice the trend of connected deaths to Dr. Engelman. His patients and community, however, only saw a generous man committed to helping his community and its citizens. Dr. Engelman was not the greatest dentist, however. He often did a sloppy job of making casts for dentures and dental appliances, requiring the work to have to be redone by the dental lab several times. His business was struggling, however, and he soon found himself in debt with the dental lab owned by Sophie Barrera. Sophie Barrera owned a South St. Louis dental laboratory and had grown tired of waiting for Dr. Engelman to pay up by 1980. She filed a lawsuit against the doctor that was said to go to court just a few days after Sophie was murdered. On January 14, 1980, Sophie entered her vehicle in South St. Louis. Shortly after, the vehicle exploded. Police found remnants of a bomb under her charred vehicle. Sophie had told her son before she was in fear of being killed. She believed Dr. Glenn Engelman was dangerous. Dr. Engelman was questioned for 3 hours and then released. Police were certain he was responsible for Sophie's death, but they had to prove it. The public also wondered if the bombing was related to another bombing in the area that was carried out between two mob families fighting for control over St. Louis labor unions. The evidence indicated, however, that this was not a mob hit. The number one suspect was the man who owed Sophie $15,000. Dr. Engelman had to be stopped, but the police weren't sure how to do it. Detectives soon began having conversations with Dr. Engelman's ex-wife and mother of his son, Ruth. Ruth told police nothing at first, but eventually started to talk. She explained that Dr. Engelman often bragged about killing people. He told her that he had a superpower he was able to kill without remorse. He had admitted to killing Eric Fry, Peter Home, and the Cuswell family. It was his side hustle, killing for profit. Ruth agreed to help the police, but none of her testimony could be used in court because Dr. Engelman confessed to her while the two were still married. He was protected by spousal privilege. Ruth decided to wear a wire, however, and met up with Dr. Engelman to exchange their son and sometimes just to socialize. They were still having a sexual relationship despite Dr. Engelman's marriage to Carmen. She tried to get Dr. Engelman to confess to her again by asking direct questions. He didn't seem to take the bait at first, and Ruth feared he would kill her next. Ruth suggested police plant a bug in her bedroom, and she would invite the dentist over for sex. Dr. Engelman was suspicious, however, and did not say anything that could lead to his arrest. Ruth then met him at a diner wearing a wire, and this time he commented on being homicidally intimate with the widow of one of his victims. He admitted to the murders in great detail, providing just what police needed for an arrest. He explained that he found murder more sexually satisfying than sex. His ex-wife was given a new life in the witness protection program. Carmen, who was no longer married to the dentist, and her brother Nick were brought in for questioning to corroborate the allegations against Dr. Engelman. As possible co-conspirators, they asked for and were granted immunity to testify against the dentist. Carmen told quite the story. She said she was working for the dentist when he suggested she find someone with good benefits to marry. He told her about Eric Fry, whom he said he directed Sandy Fry to marry with all intentions of murdering the insurance proceeds. Soon after she was married, Carmen said Dr. Engelman told her where to go and made sure her husband was shot and killed. He staged it to look like a target shooting accident. Glennon Engelman was finally arrested and charged with murder in 1980. Carmen testified at Dr. Engelman's first trial, for which he was convicted of murdering Peter Hamm and given 50 years in prison. The dentist then pled guilty to the murder of Sophie Barrera to avoid the death penalty. Serving a list sentence for that murder in Missouri, Dr. Engelman was back in court by 1985 in Illinois. In 1984, Robert Handy, a conduct and acquaintance of Dr. Engelman, admitted to authorities that he had taken part in the murder conspiracy of the Goosewell family. He implicated Dr. Engelman, who had bludgeoned Harmel Goosewell and Shaheem, as well as Ronald's widow, Barbara Boyle. Dr. Engelman was given 3 life sentences for the Goosewell murders. He also was convicted of federal mail fraud and given a 30-year federal sentence. He is believed to have killed at least 12 people, including conspiring with his first wife to kill her husband, James Bullock, in 1958. Edna Ruth was never charged in the case due to lack of evidence. Barbara Boyle went on trial for the murder of her in-laws, Arthur and Vernita Goosewell, and husband Ronald in 1985. The jury acquitted her of the murders of Arthur and Vernita by convicted her of conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Ronald Goosewell. Barbara Boyle was sentenced to 50 years in prison in 1985. She was granted parole in 2009. Dr. Engelman enjoyed his notoriety in Missouri, often comparing himself to legendary outlaw Jesse James. He is believed to have killed at least 12 people, but the actual number is unknown. Unlike other serial killers, Dr. Engelman was inspired, at least in part, by greed. He also seemed to revel in his ability to not feel remorse. Dr. Engelman died of diabetes-related health issues in 1999 at age 72. He was incarcerated in Jefferson City at the time. 79-year-old Viola Hagen lived alone in an apartment in Anaheim, California, 1980. On February 18, 1980, a neighbor of Viola became concerned about her whereabouts. Viola was often seen walking around the apartment complex, but she hadn't been seen for 2 days. The neighbor stepped inside Viola's unit and found her lifeless body. She had been assaulted and strangled. Over the years, detectives attempted to solve the case, pursuing new leads or bits of evidence, but failed to identify a suspect, and the case went cold. In September of 2020, the case was reopened. This time, investigators turned to genetic genealogy, which has been used to solve hundreds of cases across the U.S. Investigators used DNA found on Viola and compared it with genetic profiles on genealogy databases. This led investigators to 64-year-old Andre William LePere. He was arrested on April 28, 2021, at his home in Alamogordo, New Mexico, in connection to the case. He is being held without bail at an Otero County jail. It is not believed that Andre and Viola knew each other. Viola's family had this to say in a statement: "Our grandmother, Viola, was a beautiful, happy soul and did not deserve being violated in her final years of life. We are so grateful for the Anaheim Police Department never giving up after 41 years. That is our message: never, never give up." LePere was in his 20s at the time of the crime and lived close to Viola in Anaheim, California. Sometime in the 1990s, he moved east. He split his time between Arizona and New Mexico. LePere worked as a plumber and a truck driver. He married twice and had 2 children. Investigators had not established a motive for the crime. In February of 2022, LePere was convicted for the crime. He will be sentenced on May 13th. 21-year-old Pertina Epps lived in Inglewood, California in 2005. On April 26th, Pertina's body was found lying in a carport in Gardena, California. Someone was backing out of one of the 4 stalls in the carport and then discovered her. A medical examiner determined that she had been strangled. Investigators found fingerprints that did not belong to Pertina on her purse. There was also DNA from a man at the crime scene. They theorized that it belonged to the person that ended her life. Technology was not advanced enough for them to identify the culprit. Investigators could not find other useful leads, so the case went cold. In 2021, investigators took another look at Patina's case. They resubmitted forensic evidence from the crime scene using new technology. This led them to 56-year-old Charles Wright. He was arrested on January 27, 2022. Wright denied involvement in the crime. He said his fingerprints were on Patina's purse because he sold it to, according to him, at the time he was selling purses, tennis shoes, and clothing from the trunk of his car. Wright had a harder time explaining away why his DNA was found at the crime scene. Wright has been working as a teacher since 1999. He said he resigned from Inglewood Unified School District to fight the case against him. This is what he had to say. "I didn't do this. The thing is, everybody that knows me knows that I used to sell bags and clothes out of my car. That's the only possible way could happen." He said he believes people who purchased bags from him during that time period could confirm his story. County Administrator Erica F. Torres, head of Englewood Unified, told staff and parents in a letter dated Saturday that the district learned of the accusation the day before and that Wright would no longer be teaching at any of its schools. Wright is scheduled for arraignment on June 28, 2022. Authorities said that anyone with information regarding the case can anonymously contact Crime Stoppers at this number. It is not known yet why Wright did what he did, but investigators did say that they don't believe Wright and Patina knew each other. On November 6, 1994, human remains were found in the Wright Township near Coopersville in Udoa County, Michigan. The remains were found by hunters. An autopsy revealed that the remains belonged to a woman. Could not be determined how she lost her life, but foul play was suspected. Investigators asked anyone with information to come forward. They also took a look at missing persons to see if there was any link. They were not able to find her actual identity, so they referred to her as Matilda. Later, she would be known as Ujaw County Jane Doe 1994. In 2007, the Ujaw County Sheriff's Office exhumed the remains and were able to collect DNA. A DNA profile of the victim was then created. She could not be identified, however, because her DNA was not in the combined DNA index system used by the FBI. Recently, the Ujaw County Sheriff's Office partnered with the DNA Doe Project to identify the Jane Doe. The DNA Doe Project uses forensic genealogy to identify victims of crime, matching victim DNA to living relatives' DNA in various DNA databases. Recently, using that process, they identified the woman as Shelley Ray Keppert. She also went by the name Shelley Ray Christian. She was 29 years old when she went missing in 1993. She lived in Hennepin County, Minnesota, near Minneapolis, but was last known to be in Grand Rapids in February 1994. Udoa County Sheriff's Office Captain Jake Sparks said that Shelley Ray's mother and her children are still alive. Sparks hopes that now the victim's name and photo has been released, investigators can backtrack to see who she was with, why she came to Michigan, and hopefully who she was associating with. Until you know whose death you're investigating, it's very, very difficult to do an investigation, Sparks said. Maybe we have someone who steps forward and says, "Yes, I knew her," an old roommate or coworker who can provide some answers, and we can try to drill down into it and figure out who was in her life at that time. None of that can really start until we have her name. Anyone with any information about the investigation or knew Shelley Ray is asked to contact the Udoak County Sheriff's Office or Silent Observer at 1-877-888, Silent 745,368, or mozotips.com. Shelley Ray was known to wear unique glasses, as can be seen in one of the photographs. She may or may not have worn them near the time that her life was taken. 35-year-old Helen Cardwell lived in Chicago in 1992. She had recently moved from New Jersey and was due to start work at Lutheran General Hospital. On November 8, 1992, Helen's sister and brother-in-law came to visit her, but when they entered her room at the Leaning Tower YMCA in Cook County, they discovered her lifeless body. She had been strangled. Investigators collected DNA from the crime scene that belonged to the person that took her life. Detectives worked the case until 1993, but the case went cold due to lack of investigative leads. In late 2020, investigators reopened the case. They submitted numerous pieces of evidence to the Northeastern Illinois Regional Crime Laboratory in Vernon Hills. The DNA of those samples matched the DNA of Richard J. Sisto. Sisto lived close to Helen at the time her life was taken. He was on parole for a 1977 assault case in Dallas, Texas. Investigators had trouble finding Sisto after the DNA match in late 2020. Then, in August of 2021, a police database search revealed that Sisto was in jail in Texas on a 2006 parole violation warrant. Cook County detectives then traveled to Texas. There they interviewed Sisto and took a DNA sample. After some more DNA tests, it was confirmed that he was indeed the one that took Helen's life. Sisto was later brought back to Illinois to face the charges against him. It was announced to the public. At the public announcement, Helen's sister, Noka Irvin, spoke. "I'm so grateful they decided to reopen this case, and I just appreciate everyone's effort in solving it." 72-year-old Sisto was taken to the Cook County Jail on November 24, 2021. Frustratingly, he passed away in late January 2022. The cause has not been revealed yet. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.